Good evening from a village where gossip travels faster than the post. I wonder, from which part of the world are you joining us today? We do love hearing from our listeners near and far. And don't forget to subscribe, so you'll never miss when the next bit of mischief blooms. The evening drizzle over Carsely had the half-hearted persistence of a clerk doing overtime, enough to dampen one's spirits without quite justifying an umbrella. Agatha Raisin stood outside the newly refurbished Red Lion, assessing its fairy-light-covered facade with suspicion. Once a proper village pub, all horse brasses and honest smoke, it now glowed with the calculated cheer of a lifestyle magazine. Craft gin, she muttered, reading the chalkboard. Flights, tastings, botanicals, whatever happened to a decent G&T? Charles Fraith, immaculately casual beside her, smiled. Progress, my dear. Even the Cotswolds must suffer it. Agatha sniffed. She would not be outdone by a smug newcomer. Her heels clicked across the damp stone as she entered, leopard print coat swishing like a banner of intent. Inside, the familiar low ceiling and hearth remained, but the rest had been sterilized. Whitewashed walls, candles in jam jars, and a faint, fashionable smell of rosemary. Damien Vale, the young publican, stood behind the bar, radiating self-approval. Tall, handsome, and radiantly metropolitan, he wore his shirt unbuttoned one daring inch too far. "Welcome, Carsely. Let's bring the Red Lion into the 21st century." A modest cheer rose, though most villagers looked uneasy, clutching stemless glasses as if they might explode. Mrs. Bloxby smiled politely. Mrs. Bloxby would smile politely at the apocalypse. Agatha accepted a glass of something pink and suspicious. It tasted of flowers and regret. She set it down. Then Lila Crown made her entrance. The fiancé was all red lipstick, sharp laughter, and London arrogance. Within 5 minutes she had admired Charles's cufflinks, dismissed Agatha's coat as adorably vintage, and announced that local women hadn't yet met Fashion Week. Agatha's smile froze. "We prefer not to frighten the livestock," she said sweetly. Charles's eyes twinkled, which only made her cross. He was enjoying the scene far too much. Across the room, old Ted Mullins, the former landlord, sat glowering into a pint of proper ale he'd brought himself. "Mark my words," he muttered to anyone who'd listen, "he's ruined the place. Darts board gone, fireplace cold, and that daft cat missing 2 days." Missing cat? Agatha's ears pricked. Even domestic drama interested her more than small talk about juniper berries. Aye, the pub cat, Rufus, always slept on the counter. New bloke locked him out, said fur's unhygienic. Mrs. Bloxby murmured something about kindness to animals, but Damien only laughed. "It's a bar, not a barn." Agatha bristled. Anyone cruel to animals was automatically on her blacklist, along with people who said moist about cake. When Damien called for silence, she half expected him to apologize. Instead, he raised his glass high. "To the new Red Lion, tradition refreshed." The villagers echoed half-heartedly. Someone dropped a glass. It smashed, symbolic as thunder. Lila leaned against the bar, whispering to Charles in a tone too low and too intimate. Agatha's temper flickered like a faulty bulb. She caught Mrs. Bloxby's sympathetic glance and forced a laugh. "Come along, vicar's wife. Let's see what passes for snacks." They discovered a tray of microscopic canapés, smoked something on toast point. "Might as well eat the napkin," Agatha said, biting one. It was, she decided, food for people afraid of chewing. Behind them a door rattled. Damien frowned. "Private area," he called sharply. "Staff only." His tone had the edge of someone guarding treasure, or a secret. The key vanished into his pocket. Agatha, suddenly curious, wandered closer and saw a faint white powder on the doorknob. Cleaning residue, perhaps, or flour. She touched it, thoughtful. Lila's laughter cut through the room again. "Darling, you can't expect locals to appreciate minimalist decor." "No," Damien said. "They prefer clutter." The remark carried just far enough. Conversation thinned. Pride stiffened a dozen backs. Even Mrs. Bloxby looked pained. Agatha finished her watery gin in one gulp. "Come, Charles, before I commit murder." "Already?" he said cheerfully, following. "You've only been here 20 minutes. "Exactly long enough." Outside, drizzle had become steady rain. Agatha's heels skidded on the cobbles. Charles caught her arm and she shook him off more sharply than she meant. "I'm perfectly capable of walking, thank you." "So you are. Entirely alone?" "Don't start, Charles." They parted at the corner. Agatha marched home, furious at the entire modern world, her reflection flashing in puddles like an accusation. She told herself she didn't care if the Red Lion succeeded or failed, though she hoped for the latter. Back at her cottage, the cats greeted her with offended meows. She tossed her coat aside and poured a sensible whiskey. Outside, rain hissed through the hedgerows. The village lights shimmered on wet stone. Carsely was not improved by novelty, she thought. It was already perfect, except for the people. A knock at the door interrupted her brooding. Mrs. Blocksby stood on the step, umbrella dripping. "Forgive me, Mrs. Raisin. I wondered if you noticed anything odd at the pub tonight." Agatha hesitated. Aside from the decor and that woman's dress? Something tense between Mr. Vale and Miss Crown. Agatha recalled the locked door, the missing cat, the sudden flash of anger when Damien caught her looking. Perhaps a lover's quarrel, or business. He guards that storeroom as if it's full of crown jewels. Mrs. Blocksby's brow furrowed. Or something less innocent. They shared a moment's silence, the sort that leaves faint ripples in the air. When the vicar's wife left, Agatha fed the cats, switched off the lights, and climbed to bed still muttering about arrogance and fake charm. Sleep came late. Her last thought before drifting off was of the storeroom door and the white dust on her fingertips. Morning arrived clean and cold. The village lane glistened under weak sunlight. Agatha opened her window to the smell of damp stone and bacon. Carsely was stirring, bakers clattering trays, postmen whistling. Ordinary life. Until the sirens broke it. She dressed in record time and followed the sound to the Red Lion. A small crowd gathered outside the taped entrance, murmuring. Bill Wong's police car stood askew by the curb. He emerged, raincoat flapping, and spotted her immediately. "Agatha," he warned, expression resigned. "Don't." "Don't what? I'm merely observing civic tragedy." From behind the line. She obeyed, technically. Leaning close, she saw the stretcher being carried out. The sheet was pulled high, but she caught a glimpse of hair, dark and damp with cider. "Who?" she whispered. Bill sighed. Damien Vale, behind the bar, fell face first into one of his own vats. Agatha blinked. The drizzle began again, thin and persistent. Was it an accident? Too early to say. She watched the police load the body into the van. Lila Crown stood apart, mascara streaking, cigarette trembling. Even grief looked theatrical on her. Agatha folded her arms, chin high. "I told you craft gin was dangerous." Bill almost smiled. "You told me everything's dangerous, and I'm usually right." He shook his head and walked away. Agatha stayed a moment longer, rain soaking her hair. The Red Lion's sign creaked in the wind, a painted lion mid-roar, suddenly more omen than emblem. She turned homeward, pulse quickened not by shock but by curiosity. Carsely had its first fresh scandal of the season, and she, Agatha Raisin, intended to be in the thick of it. An hour later, under a raw grey drizzle, the air smelled faintly of cider and wet thatch. Agatha Raisin stood by the tape strung across the Red Lion's doorway, coat buttoned tight, and watched uniformed officers tramp through puddles with the solemn energy of people who rather liked being important. Bill Wong spotted her at once. "You're not supposed to be here," he said mildly. "Neither is Damien Vale," she replied. "And yet here we are," he sighed. "Please don't start investigating. We've enough trouble without you removing the cordon the place with your handbag." "Honestly, Bill, you make it sound as if I go around scattering clues like breadcrumbs. I'm simply observing." "Observing leads to interfering." "Only when there's something to interfere with." His mouth twitched. He'd long ago realized that Agatha treated official warnings as invitations. The drizzle thickened, and the pub's sign, a lion mid-roar, dripped miserably. "Poisoning, was it?" she asked in what she imagined was a casual tone. "We're not discussing details." "Which means yes." "Which means I'm not saying another word." He turned away, but she noticed the way his eyes flicked towards the rear yard. Interesting. Agatha walked home under her umbrella, mind humming. Damien Vale, handsome, smug, metropolitan, and dead. It was almost poetic justice, though she reminded herself that murder was still frowned upon. By the time she reached the village shop, gossip had already blossomed like mould in a damp cupboard. Mrs. Cartwright behind the counter was dispensing both tea cakes and information. Terrible business, Mrs. Raisin, she said, voice low but carrying. They say he owed money everywhere. Suppliers threatening court, the brewery furious, and that fiancé of his, London type, painted nails like talons. Lila Crown, said Agatha, selecting a packet of biscuits she didn't need. Terribly tragic. Did she faint or scream? Neither. Just lit a cigarette and said typical. Heartless, if you ask me. From the queue, Mr. Jenks the plumber offered. He banned me last week. Said I had the wrong vibe. You do, muttered his wife. There you are, said Mrs. Cartwright, triumphant. Enemies everywhere. Agatha paid and lingered, savouring the thrill of communal indignation. The village was alive again, buzzing, speculating, knitting together suspicion as deftly as Mrs. Blocksby crocheted shawls. They'll want someone to blame, said Mrs. Cartwright darkly, and you know what that means. Yes, said Agatha. Me. She swept out before anyone could agree. Back at her cottage, she poured coffee and stared at the rain-spattered window. Bill would be trudging through evidence with his sensible shoes and his sensible conscience. She, on the other hand, had intuition, a far rarer commodity. A gentle tap sounded at the door. Mrs. Blocksby entered, smelling of lavender and concern. I thought you might like some company, she said. It's always unsettling when tragedy strikes so close to home. Close to pub, you mean? Sit down. They shared coffee while the cats dozed like critics. You must promise me not to get involved, Mrs. Blocksby began softly. Let the police handle it. Agatha arched a penciled brow. Why does everyone say that, as if it's reasonable? Because it is. They'd never find their own shoelaces without me. Besides, someone has to defend Carsely's reputation. Village of the Poisoned Pint won't look good on the tourist brochures. Mrs. Blocksby smiled. Perhaps you might defend it quietly. Agatha changed the subject by producing her mascara. I'm going into Evesham later. Need more of this. Is that really essential today? Absolutely. Focus requires definition. When Mrs. Blocksby left, Agatha slipped on her coat again. Rain or not, she intended another look at the crime scene. The police had gone for lunch, leaving a single constable yawning by the tape. Agatha's brisk step and air of ownership carried her past him with nothing more than a nod. Inside, the pub was eerily still. The fire had been relit for atmosphere. Smoke curled lazily through the damp air. A few overturned stools and a puddle of spilled cider marked where the body had been. She scanned the room. Something about the neatness of it annoyed her. Death should have left more mess. Near the back door stood a rubbish bin half full of charred scraps. She crouched, wrinkling her nose. Among the ashes, a corner of paper still clung together, its edges singed. She teased it free with her pen. Most of the writing was gone, but two initials survived in bold ink. L.C., Lila Crown, or local council, or something entirely different. A note, not a verdict. She slipped the fragment into her pocket just as footsteps echoed. Mrs. Raisin? She straightened guiltily. Bill stood in the doorway, arms folded. I told you. I was merely retrieving my umbrella. I think I left it here last night. You didn't. Then I was checking to be sure. He sighed. You'll make yourself a suspect one of these days. I'd be an excellent one. Motivated, resourceful, fashion-forward. Agatha. All right. I'm leaving. Outside, the drizzle had thickened into proper rain. Bill followed her to the curb. For what it's worth, he said quietly, it doesn't look accidental, but we've plenty of motives and not much sense. You'll have both soon enough, she said briskly, which he correctly interpreted as I already know more than you. She stopped by the chemist for her mascara, and because she enjoyed the incongruity, a new notepad labelled Personal Reflections. Back home, she dried off and opened it. Suspects, Lila Crown, fiancé, temperament unstable, wardrobe criminal. Ted Mullins, former landlord, publicly resentful. Flora Pym, counsellor thwarted by Damien's licence issues. She added, mystery storeroom, and underlined it twice. The cats leapt onto the table, smearing paw prints across her notes. You're right, she told them. The man was hiding something. The rain eased to a murmur. Through the window, she saw Mrs. Blocksby crossing the green with her umbrella tilted just so, serene amid chaos. Agatha felt a flicker of envy. How did the woman manage calm when everyone else boiled? The telephone rang. Roy Silver's voice, bright as neon. "Darling, I hear your village has gone full midsummer. Do try not to be arrested before I arrive. The press will need quotes." "Roy, you're not coming down." "Too late. I smell opportunity." She slammed the phone down, though a small, traitorous smile lingered. Even notoriety was company. That evening the clouds tore open briefly, letting a watery sunset spill over the hills. Agatha walked to the lane's end, enjoying the scent of wet earth and the illusion of peace. Somewhere behind the pub she heard a cat yowl. She hesitated. Rufus, perhaps? When she reached the hedge, only the wind stirred. She turned for home, the scrap of burnt paper warm in her pocket. It rustled like a secret trying to speak. "L.C.," she murmured. "Lila Crown, or someone clever enough to make it look that way." Her pulse quickened, not from fear but anticipation. There was nothing quite so enlivening as the first glimmer of a mystery, and nothing, she admitted privately, so comforting as having a purpose again. At her gate she paused, watching the village lights blink on one by one. Somewhere behind the drizzle, life carried on. Teapots clinking, televisions murmuring, normal people being normal. She envied them briefly, then laughed at herself. Normality had never suited her. She went inside, set the kettle on, and smoothed the scrap of paper flat on the table. The initials shone faintly in the lamplight. "All right, Damien Vale," she said aloud. "Let's see who killed your sense of style, and you along with it." The kettle began to whistle, and Agatha smiled. Tomorrow would be a fine day for sleuthing. The drizzle had finally given up by noon, though the sky still wore the sullen look of someone unconvinced by improvement. Agatha Raisin opened her curtains, surveyed her immaculate patio, and decided that nothing so minor as a murder should interrupt her social life. If the village was going to whisper, they might as well whisper over quiche. She rang Mrs. Bloxby first, partly for moral balance and partly because the vicar's wife lent an air of decency to anything, rather like parsley on a dubious dish. "A small luncheon," Agatha explained. "Community healing, that sort of thing." "And by healing, you mean interrogation?" "Semantics, dear. One must call things something polite if one wants people to come." By 2 o'clock her cottage smelled of pastry and ambition. The dining table gleamed. The good china had been liberated from its sulk in the dresser. The cats watched from the windowsill, faintly appalled by the flurry. Roy Silver arrived first, sweeping in with the energy of a man who believed curtains should applaud his entrance. "Darling Aggie, this village is everywhere. My editor wants a human interest piece. Death in the drizzle. Isn't it marvellous?" "It's murder, not marvellous," she snapped, though secretly she thrilled at the phrase. He handed her a bottle of rosé with a label that screamed London prices. "Consider it moral support." Next came Charles Fraith, in a navy jumper so soft it could have been illegal. He kissed Agatha's cheek lightly, making her flush with equal parts pleasure and irritation. "I couldn't resist. I hear there's quiche and suspects." "Guests," she corrected. "Do try to behave." Lila Crown arrived last, late enough to establish importance, wrapped in a coat that might have been designed for an expensive funeral. The moment she stepped inside, the air grew perfumed and tense. "Such a sweet cottage," she said, eyes sweeping the room. "So very rural." "And yet we managed to survive," said Agatha. "Flora Pym's on her way, and Ted Mullins too. I do like to mix my company." "Like gin and guilt," murmured Charles. Ted appeared precisely then, shoulders hunched, hair untidy as if still mourning the old pub. He nodded to no one and accepted a plate with the wary look of a man checking for poison. Flora Pym followed, neat, severe, smelling faintly of starch. She carried a folder even to lunch. "Only staying a moment," she said. "Council duties." "Perfect," said Agatha. "You can keep us all lawful." They settled round the table. The conversation began with cautious niceties, weather, village spirit, the deplorable state of social media, until Agatha steered it toward the inevitable. "Such a tragedy about poor Damien. Did any of you see him the evening before he, took ill?" "You mean died," said Lila coolly. "And yes, he was alive when I left, if that helps." "Alive tends to," said Charles. Flora's lips thinned. "I warned him his license renewal might be delayed. He didn't take kindly to authority." "Nor to paying bills," muttered Ted. "He owed me wages, the flashy sod." Roy leaned forward, delighted. "So many motives, so little time. I must jot this down." Agatha glared. This isn't a press briefing. The cat chose that moment to leap onto the sideboard, tail twitching. Lila reached to stroke it, and the animal hissed violently, backing away with fur raised. "Strange creature," Lila said, affronted. "It's the perfume," murmured Mrs. Bloxby gently. "Animals are sensitive to certain scents." "It's called night venom," Lila announced. "Appropriate," said Agatha. The table erupted in laughter, thinly disguised as coughs. Lila flushed and reached for her glass. "I suppose you all think I killed him for money? Well, let me save you the speculation. I inherit half the business. The other half goes to the brewery. So if I wanted him dead, I've only succeeded in getting new partners." Charles, who'd been silent, said softly, "Half of a thriving pub is still something, unless it stops thriving." Her eyes flickered. Agatha caught it, the first genuine crack. He was trying to sell to a chain, wasn't he? Perhaps someone objected. "He talked of expanding," said Flora. "Corporate backing, rebranding, the Red Lion experience. I told him it would never pass local approval." "And yet, you might have enjoyed a share of the prestige," Agatha suggested. Flora's jaw tightened. "I serve the public, not publicity." "Of course," murmured Roy. "How selfless." Ted barked a laugh. "She serves herself same as the rest." "Watch your tongue," Flora snapped. "Can't. Don't own a mirror that big." Agatha intervened with brisk authority. "Another slice of quiche, anyone? The broccoli's only slightly overdone." The truce lasted as long as the pastry. Conversation drifted to the missing cat Rufus, then to the pub's mysterious storeroom. "Police still haven't opened it," said Ted. "Locked, key missing. I say he hid something in there." "Contraband gin?" asked Roy. "Or tax forms," said Flora. "Both deadly." Agatha smiled, but her mind ticked. Locked rooms, missing cats, perfume that made even felines recoil, details each with a scent of meaning. When the plates were cleared, Mrs. Bloxby rose tactfully. "A lovely lunch, Mrs. Raisin. I'm sure the village will appreciate your effort to bring people together." "Yes," said Lila dryly. "We're practically a family now, one that doesn't trust each other." As guests drifted to the door, Charles lingered. "You've still got it, Aggie. Interrogation by hospitality. Anyone else would use a notepad. You use quiche." "At least mine's edible," she said. "What did you make of her?" "Lila? Terribly brittle. Money can't mend that. And she's not grieving, she's calculating. Oh, and did you hear the bit about inheritance, half the business? You might call that motive-flavoured gin." Agatha frowned. "Or red herring soufflé, she's too obvious." "You like them obvious? Easier to feel superior." "Don't be smug, Charles, it doesn't suit your hair." Roy burst back in for his coat, humming the theme from a detective drama. "Darling, this was deliciously tense. If you die next, promise I get the exclusive." "Out," said Agatha, but her laughter chased him to the gate. When the last car rolled away, quiet settled over the cottage like an after-party sigh. The cats resumed ownership of the chairs. Agatha gathered plates mechanically, her mind still whirring. The laughter and perfume lingered in the air, mingled with something sharper, the faint chemical tang of Lila's scent, perhaps, or imagination. She stood at the sink, staring through the window at the dim shape of the Red Lion down the lane. The pub lights were off, but one window upstairs glimmered faintly. Security lamp or ghost, who could tell? She dried her hands slowly. "Purely for research," she told the cats. "A little nocturnal reconnaissance never hurt anyone." One cat yawned, unimpressed. The other blinked as if to say she was incorrigible. Agatha smiled. "Exactly." She fetched her torch and a coat more sensible than stylish, though not too sensible, and checked her reflection. A touch more mascara. Investigation, after all, was no reason to let standards slip. Outside, the damp night waited, smelling of gin, gossip, and guilt. That night, after the council meeting's chaos and Bill's warning, the Cotswold night had the glossy, treacherous beauty of black enamel. Rain clung to every roof tile and hedge, turning Carsely into a glistening model village under the moon. Agatha Raisin, peering from behind her net curtain, felt the familiar itch of restlessness. Some women took up knitting at her age. She preferred light breaking and entering. Charles Fraith, sprawled on her sofa and eating her remaining quiche, regarded her with lazy amusement. "You realize, Aggie, that this is how people end up in prison?" "People," she said, pulling on her trench coat, "who get caught. We are not people who get caught." "You mean you're not," he said. "I'm merely the chauffeur." "Exactly. Now finish that and fetch the torch." The rain eased to a slick whisper as they crossed the village green. Agatha's umbrella bobbed like a stealthy black mushroom. The Red Lion loomed ahead, shutters drawn, its painted lion sign creaking faintly in the wind. "You're certain the alarm's off?" whispered Charles. "I rang the brewery pretending to be the cleaner," she murmured. "They said it hasn't been reset since the police finished. Do stop looking so nervous. You'll wrinkle." The side gate yielded with a groan. They slipped round the back, shoes squelching on wet gravel. A faint mew startled them both. "That wretched cat again," said Agatha, "haunting the place like Hamlet's father." Rufus, the pub cat, blinked up from a pile of bins, eyes twin coins in the dark. He followed as they crept toward the storeroom door. A shiny new padlock gleamed on it. Charles produced a small tool from his pocket. "Where did you learn to pick locks?" "Eton," he said smoothly. "And you?" "Birmingham." With a satisfying click, the padlock surrendered. The door swung open to reveal a narrow room lined with barrels and stacked crates labelled Private Reserve. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, its light weak and yellow. The air smelled faintly of apples and disinfectant, with something metallic beneath. Agatha shone her torch along the nearest shelf. "Private Reserve of what, I wonder? Cider? Gin? Skeletons?" "Don't tempt fate," said Charles. He lifted one bottle. A faint odour rose, sweet, chemical, unsettling. "Put that down," she hissed. "If it's poison, you'll ruin my evening by dying." "You're all heart." They found a ledger on the counter, cover damp, pages scrawled with initials and numbers. LC, FP, TM. Agatha traced the neat columns with a gloved finger. "Looks like payments or deliveries. Why code them unless there's something to hide?" "Maybe Damien fancied himself a spy." "Or a blackmailer," she said softly. "There was that burnt letter, remember? Someone paid him, or he paid them. Either way, it ended in cider." Charles leaned against the wall, watching her with amused fondness. "You really do love this, don't you? The sneaking about, the deduction, the drama." "Nonsense. I'm performing a civic duty." "And wearing mascara to do it." Before she could retort, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps sounded from the yard. They froze. The bulb flickered. Agatha's pulse thudded in her throat. "Quick! Behind there!" she whispered. They ducked behind a stack of barrels, crouching so close she could smell Charles's aftershave, something woody and infuriatingly expensive. The door creaked open wider. Light from a torch swept the room in a slow arc. Agatha held her breath. A figure stepped inside, slender, female, wrapped in a dark coat with a fur collar. The torch beam glinted on the curve of a polished boot. She moved with the careful speed of someone who knew exactly where to go. Agatha's mind ticked. Lila Crown, surely. That perfume alone, sharp, predatory, confirmed it. Night venom. The woman lifted one of the Private Reserve bottles, examined it briefly, and slipped it into a bag. Then she turned and left as quietly as she'd come. Agatha exhaled only when the outer door clicked shut. "Well," she whispered, "caught in the act. Proof." Charles shook his head. "Proof of what? That women with fur collars like gin? That she's hiding something. Aggie, everyone in this village is hiding something, including you. Now can we leave before someone else arrives?" As they edged toward the exit, a low growl froze them again. Rufus, ever contrary, had planted himself in the doorway, tail thrashing. "Shoo!" hissed Agatha. The cat hissed back. Charles tried charm. "Nice kitty." The animal launched at his ankle. Rufus vanished into the yard again, a streak of damp fury. He yelped, stumbled into a barrel, and the noise reverberated through the small room like a cannon. Agatha lunged to steady him. The torch flew from her hand and rolled across the floor, its beam flashing wildly. "Brilliant," she muttered. "Now we're burglars and slapstick." They managed to slip outside, hearts hammering. Agatha relocked the door with trembling fingers. Rufus, mollified, trotted after them as if escorting them off the premises. Halfway down the lane, Charles stopped to catch his breath, hair plastered by rain. "You realize," he said, "if anyone saw us, we'd be explaining this to Bill in the morning." "I'd simply tell him the truth," said Agatha, straightening her collar. "He never believes it anyway." "And the cat?" "An accomplice. He's clearly been guarding contraband." They reached her cottage without incident, dripping and breathless. Inside, Agatha hung up her coat and poured 2 whiskies. The fire had sunk to embers. Its glow caught the mischief in her eyes. "You must admit," she said, "that was exhilarating." "Terrifying," corrected Charles. "Also illegal." "Oh, do stop moralizing. You looked positively alive for once." He raised his glass. "To shared criminality." "To curiosity," she said, clinking it. The clock chimed midnight. Outside, rain whispered steadily, and Rufus's mournful mew echoed faintly through the night. Agatha woke late the next morning to sunlight stabbing through the curtains like accusation. Her head throbbed faintly, half whiskey, half adrenaline. The cats were already stationed at the front door, meowing with unusual insistence. All right," she muttered, pulling on a dressing gown. When she opened the door, a small parcel sat on the mat, wrapped in newspaper and damp from dew. She bent, frowning. Inside was a bottle, the same distinctive shape from the storeroom, its label Private Reserve smudged but legible. A faint, bitter almond scent drifted up, unmistakable even to an amateur detective with good perfume memory. "Cyanide," she whispered. Her stomach tightened. Someone knew she'd been there. Someone wanted to frighten her or warn her. From the lane came the cheerful rattle of the postman's cart, ordinary life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Agatha stood very still, bottle in hand, the morning sun glinting off the glass. "Oh, this is getting interesting," she murmured, "and dangerously tidy, just how I like it." She set the bottle carefully on the windowsill, fetched a pen, and began a new list. Clues: ledger with initials, Lila's midnight visit, bottle delivered to door. Questions: who knew we were there? Was it a warning or a threat? Why almonds? The cats watched, tails twitching, as if offering feline commentary. Agatha met their gaze. "Don't look at me like that. You started it." A soft knock at the back door made her jump. It was Charles, impeccably dressed again, holding 2 croissants. "I thought you might need breakfast after our life of crime," he said. "You look rather good in guilt." "Don't flirt. Look." She pointed at the bottle. He leaned close, sniffed, and recoiled. "Good Lord, who sent it?" "Someone with access to the storeroom and a sense of drama. You realize, of course, that if the police trace our footprints, we'll look twice as guilty." "Then we'd better find the real killer first," said Agatha briskly, "preferably before Mrs. Blocksby hears about the midnight escapade and adds sin to my list of misdemeanors." Charles smiled. "I'm sure she already has a separate column for you." Agatha poured coffee, ignoring him. Outside, the church bells began to chime the hour, bright and ordinary against the unease curling in her stomach. She stared at the bottle once more, the sunlight catching the glass like a wink from the devil. "All right," she said quietly, half to herself. "If it's war, it's war. But I do wish murderers would stop being so theatrical." The cats purred in agreement, and somewhere beyond the hedgerows Rufus yowled again, an echo of the night before, a reminder that secrets once disturbed seldom went back to sleep. The following morning, sunlight slanted across Agatha Raisin's kitchen that had been left on her doorstep like a taunt. It stood there now, menacingly respectable, its pale cider catching the light as if nothing deadly could ever lurk in such an ordinary thing. Agatha, in her dressing gown and slippers, regarded it as one might a sleeping adder. The faint scent of almonds still lingered. She'd left the cap on overnight, but evil, she suspected, was the sort that seeped through seals. "Right," she told the cats. "Scientific experiment, limited risk, perfectly reasonable." She fetched a teaspoon and a cube of sugar, placing both on a saucer with the solemnity of a priest preparing communion. The plan, she'd decided, was to test the cider's potency in the least fatal way possible. 1 drop, perhaps 2, enough to prove what she already suspected: cyanide. She prized the cap off carefully and dipped the spoon. The liquid fizzed faintly as it met the sugar, releasing that unmistakable bitter scent. Sweet first, then metallic. She wrinkled her nose. "You vile little potion," she murmured. "If I'd been fool enough to drink you, you'd have put me in the obituaries under poor taste in Friends." The cats, unimpressed, resumed washing themselves. Her phone rang just as she was sealing the bottle again. Bill Wong's steady voice filled the room. "Morning, Agatha. I hear you've been receiving suspicious deliveries." Word travels fast. I haven't been poisoned yet, if that's what you're calling to check. Don't tell me you touched it. Of course I touched it. How else do you expect me to investigate? From a distance? He sighed. Please tell me you haven't tried tasting it. Certainly not. I'm not an idiot. She hesitated. I tested it. Scientifically. Meaning? A little sugar cube experiment, minimal risk. For heaven's sake, Agatha, you do realize that minimal risk with cyanide is still fatal, don't you? Oh, stop fussing. I've kept the evidence intact. You can pick it up before some health and safety inspector confiscates it. Promise me you'll stay out of the pub for now. Bill, dear, you say that as though I ever promise things I intend to keep. He groaned softly and rang off. That afternoon, the village notice board declared an emergency community meeting would be held at the parish hall to discuss the future of the Red Lion. Agatha, curiosity outweighing any lingering sense of self-preservation, decided she must attend. The rain had returned, thin, sulky drizzle, and the hall smelled faintly of wet coats and boiled vegetables. Folding chairs creaked as villagers gathered, each clutching grievances like hymn books. Mrs. Bloxby sat near the front, serene as ever, while Flora Pym arranged her papers with the air of a woman ready to legislate salvation. Lila Crown, resplendent in black cashmere and tragedy, dabbed her eyes for effect. Ted Mullins leaned against the wall, muttering darkly to a friend about soulless corporations and fancy London gin. Agatha took a seat midway down the aisle, hoping for proximity to gossip and distance from moral lectures. Flora tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, as acting chair of the village council, I hereby open this meeting to determine the fate of the Red Lion. We must decide whether it remains closed pending investigation or reopens under new management, interrupted Lila, preferably mine. A rustle of disapproval swept the room. It's only fair, Lila continued, undeterred. Damien and I rebuilt that place. The least I deserve is to continue his work. Ted barked a laugh. You mean cash in on it, you mean? He told me himself he was selling to a chain, corporate nonsense, craft gin in bottles that cost more than rent. Nonsense, said Lila, though her voice wavered. He was passionate about the village. Passionate about profit, said Ted. Agatha leaned forward. The tension had that particular Carsely flavour, moral outrage lightly dusted with jealousy. Flora raised a hand for silence. Let's keep this civil. The council's concern is heritage. We cannot have developers dictating tradition. Oh, tradition, scoffed Lila. Half of you only came here for cheaper property and charm. Damien was bringing modern life to Carsely, not turning it into a museum. Agatha smiled faintly. The woman had no idea how to survive among villagers. One didn't insult their charm. One gently admired it and then ignored it. Bill Wong entered discreetly at the back, rein on his shoulders. His eyes met Agatha's briefly. She looked away, knowing that look meant behave. The debate dragged on, voices rising and falling. Flora's clipped precision versus Lila's wounded theatrics, Ted's bitterness against Mrs. Bloxby's patient moderation. It was when Flora lifted her notes that Agatha noticed it, the faint black smear on her cuff. Ink. Same dark hue as the scorched corner of the letter she'd found days ago. The tiny, telltale detail caught her breath. She waited for a lull, then rose. If I may, she said, sweetly dangerous. Before we all start electing new landlords, perhaps we should discuss what exactly Damien Vale was doing before his unfortunate demise. A ripple of discomfort went through the hall. What do you mean, Mrs. Raisin? Flora asked. Simply that the man was keeping coded records and burning correspondence. I imagine some of you might know why. Flora coloured slightly. I haven't the faintest idea what you're implying. Oh, nothing at all, said Agatha. It's just curious that someone with ink-stained fingers should be so defensive. Lila gave a short, delighted laugh. You see? Everyone had secrets with Damien. I told the police as much. Bill cleared his throat. Let's not turn this into a courtroom. Oh, but isn't it already? Agatha murmured. Flora glared at her. If you're referring to that ridiculous letter the police found fragments of, I assure you I've never seen it. Agatha smiled thinly. Of course not. Ink does have a habit of wandering onto one's sleeves, though. For a moment, the room hung still, then chairs scraped, papers shuffled, and the storm moved on to safer topics like alcohol taxes. But Agatha knew she'd struck a nerve. After the meeting, she walked home with Mrs. Bloxby under a single umbrella. The drizzle had softened into a silver mist. "You were rather sharp with Flora," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "Sharpness works better than charm in these matters. Besides, she's lying." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Bloxby, "but sometimes people lie to protect themselves, not to deceive others." "And sometimes they lie because they're guilty," Agatha said. She had ink on her cuff, same colour as the burnt letter. "I'd stake my reputation, what's left of it." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "Your reputation seems quite sturdy for all the staking it endures." Agatha laughed despite herself. "You make me sound like a vampire." "Only one who feeds on gossip." "And evidence," said Agatha briskly. When they reached her gate, the vicar's wife laid a hand on her arm. "Be careful, Agatha. Curiosity is useful, but it's also exhausting. You can't always rescue everyone, or everything." Agatha softened. "Don't worry. I'll confine my heroism to tea and speculation." But when she stepped inside, she didn't make tea. She went straight to her desk, unwrapped the scrap of burnt paper again, and held it beside a droplet from her pen. Same ink, unmistakable. "Flora Pym," she whispered. "Councilwoman, civic virtue, occasional liar." The cats watched her solemnly, tails curled. She sighed, feeling that peculiar mix of triumph and emptiness that followed every breakthrough. Solving puzzles was easy, living with people wasn't. Her phone buzzed. A text from Charles. "Still alive, darling sleuth. Dinner tomorrow." She smiled. "Maybe," she replied, "if I'm not poisoned first." Outside, the drizzle thickened again, pattering against the glass like applause for her audacity. She leaned back in her chair, allowing herself one moment of smug satisfaction before the unease returned. Flora Pym had denied everything, but guilt, Agatha thought, had a way of seeping through denial, just as ink seeped through fabric. She turned down the light, poured herself a glass of wine, and murmured to the cats, "Well, my darlings, it appears the toast truly has turned toxic." They blinked in agreement, purring as if toasting her in return. Rain had returned to Carsely as though personally offended by the brief spell of sunshine. Fat drops spattered Agatha Raisin's windows, blurring the offending newspaper headline that lay on her kitchen table. "Village sleuth or vanity project?" glared up at her like a personal insult. The cats watched her pace. "Vanity project," she muttered, as if any project of mine could be small enough for vanity alone. A knock at the door interrupted her tirade. She opened it to find Bill Wong, damp and apologetic, holding an umbrella that dripped decorously onto her mat. "Morning, Agatha. Thought I'd better see you before the rest of the world does." "Too late," she said. "Half of Mercester's already reading about my alleged reign of terror." He smiled faintly. "You've had worse press." "Not since my PR days, and then at least I was being paid to be vilified." Bill removed his coat and looked genuinely contrite. "It wasn't me who leaked anything, I swear. Someone at headquarters must have spoken out of turn. The chief superintendent isn't pleased either." "Good," said Agatha, pouring coffee with the severity of a magistrate. "Then perhaps he'll discover what real defamation feels like. Aggie, take my advice. Lie low for a few days. Don't talk to reporters, don't break into pubs, don't exist," she snapped. He sighed. "You're not a suspect in any official sense, but the story makes the force look foolish, so I'm getting flack." "Then we're both victims," she said sweetly. "Misunderstood heroes, crushed by mediocrity." Bill accepted his coffee, wisely ignoring that. "Any new theories?" "Plenty. None I'm willing to share with an institution that thinks I'm headline material." He laughed. "Pride before arrest, eh?" "Before breakfast, usually." A rattle at the window made them both glance up. Charles Fraith appeared outside, sheltering beneath an umbrella that matched his navy jumper. Agatha rolled her eyes. "Another well-wisher," she said. Charles entered with the air of a man delivering condolences to a widow. "Aggie, my dear, you're infamous. The internet adores you. I even saw a blog calling you the Cotswold Columbo." "Columbo never had bad hair," she retorted. Bill looked amused. "We could use your statement on record, Charles, about the night at the pub." "Heavens, no! I was merely the getaway driver." Agatha glared. "Don't say things like that in front of the police." "Sorry. Habit." He perched on a chair. "So what's the plan? Public apology? Lawsuit? Or shall we actually solve this murder?" "The last one," said Agatha firmly, "before someone writes my obituary as colourful but meddlesome." The village shop later that morning was a hive of speculative sympathy. Conversations halted whenever Agatha entered, then resumed in the louder, brighter tones reserved for the newly notorious. "Terrible business," said Mrs. Cartwright behind the counter. "Never thought you'd be mixed up in that sort of thing, Mrs. Raisin." "Neither did I," said Agatha, buying milk she didn't need. A man near the biscuit stage whispered, "That's her, the poison woman." "Poison finder," she corrected coldly, and marched out to the accompaniment of squeaking rain boots. Carsely, she reflected grimly, loved scandal almost as much as it loved scones. Still, humiliation had its uses. Everyone talked more when they thought you were safely disgraced. At the vicarage that afternoon, Mrs. Blocksby received her with quiet compassion. The drawing-room smelled of furniture polish and moral order. "My dear Mrs. Raisin," she said, pouring tea, "I hope you're not taking the newspaper too seriously." "Public character assassination, you mean?" "Oh no, I find it character-building." Mrs. Blocksby smiled. "Sometimes humiliation teaches us humility." "And sometimes it teaches us that journalists are parasites," said Agatha. "Though I must say, the photograph's not the worst I've looked." The vicar's wife hesitated. "There is another matter. The Reverend has been asked some rather uncomfortable questions by parishioners about that lighter the police mentioned. He's mortified, of course." Agatha's pulse jumped. "The gold one? With his initials?" "Apparently, yes. He misplaced it weeks ago, but it seems it found its way into the most unfortunate company." "Damien Vale's company," said Agatha softly. "Indeed. My husband assures me he lent it to someone at a council meeting, though he can't recall whom. You see why gossip must be handled delicately." Agatha felt a twinge of guilt. Her imagination had leapt too readily toward melodrama. Mrs. Blocksby, ever gracious, noticed her discomfort. "You only seek truth, my dear, but truth can be messy." "So can perms," said Agatha, attempting levity. They both laughed, easing the tension. When she left, the rain had stopped, leaving a pale sky and streets gleaming like honesty after confession. Yet the puzzle of the lighter nagged her. If not the Reverend, then who? That evening Charles returned, bearing wine and irreverence. "To the scandalized sleuth," he toasted. "Long may she trend on social media." "If I ever trend, shoot me," she said, clinking his glass. "I visited Mrs. Blocksby. She says her husband lost the lighter at a council meeting, which means it could have passed through several hands before landing at the Red Lion." "Flora Pym attends those meetings," he reminded her, "and Ted Mullins sometimes does maintenance work there." "Exactly," said Agatha. "A veritable relay race of guilt." They settled by the fire. Rain hissed on the chimney, a comfortable accompaniment to conspiracy. Charles stretched. "So where does our investigation stand, apart from ankle-deep in mud?" "We have motives aplenty," said Agatha, ticking them off. "Flora, political embarrassment. Lila, inheritance and spite. Ted, revenge. And now, possibly, whoever borrowed the Reverend's lighter." "You're leaving out yourself," said Charles. She shot him a look. "I'm the heroine, not the headline." Sadly, the Echo disagrees. Before she could retort, the telephone rang. She snatched it up. "Mrs. Raisin? Roy Silver here. Disaster." "You mean besides the one already in print?" "Worse. Television. They're sending a crew tomorrow to film the Cotswold Killer's neighborhood. I tried to spin it, darling, I truly did, but they've booked interviews with half the village. You'll need to look contrite yet photogenic." Agatha's groan was heartfelt. "Roy, if you bring another camera near me, I'll use that poisoned cider as hairspray." "Don't be huffy, Aggie. Controversy sells. Think of the exposure." "Exposure is for streakers, not detectives." She slammed the phone down. Charles raised an eyebrow. "The vultures circling?" "Worse. Roy organizing them." "At least it proves you're famous again." "If this goes on," she said grimly, "I'll need to solve the murder just to reclaim my good name." The next morning dawned deceptively calm, with a pale wash of sun over damp fields. Agatha ventured out early, determined to face the day before it could ambush her. She found Bill outside the Red Lion talking to a technician setting up police tape for the inevitable TV shot. "Morning," she said tartly. "I hear I'm about to star in When Detectives Go Bad." He looked tired. "Ignore them. They'll lose interest once someone new gets caught drink driving in Cheltenham." "And until then?" "Try not to antagonize anyone." "Impossible request." He smiled despite himself. "For what it's worth, I still think you're right about the ledger. Forensics found faint impressions under the last page, as if someone pressed too hard writing initials. They're trying to lift them. Good, she said, heart quickening. If those marks match FP, Flora Pym's sanctimonious composure will crack like cheap porcelain. Careful, he warned. She's well connected. So am I, said Agatha, socially if not spiritually. As she walked back through the village, heads turned and curtains twitched, but she held her chin high. Let them gossip. Pride, after all, was armour, and in Carsely dignity was the only weapon that cost nothing. At home she fed the cats, poured herself another cup of courage disguised as coffee, and glanced again at the newspaper on the table. Her photograph seemed to smirk now, as if in on the joke. All right, she told it. If they want a spectacle, I'll give them one, with facts, evidence, and better lighting. She sat down, drew a fresh page in her notebook, and wrote in bold capitals, Objective, clear name, catch killer, fix hair. Outside, the rain began again, steady and approving. The drizzle had finally cleared, but the air itself seemed thick with curiosity. At the village green, camera crews had come and gone, leaving muddy tracks and a lingering smell of damp ambition. Agatha Raisin, however, had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of retreat. She appeared at the post office in a tailored coat, hair freshly set, and an expression of calm superiority. Inside, whispers faltered. A few brave souls managed polite nods. Agatha returned each one with regal indifference. Pride, she decided, was cheaper than therapy. By afternoon, even the gossip had tired itself out, shifting to the latest development, an emergency luncheon of the parish council to restore community unity. Mrs. Bloxby, always diplomatic, telephoned to invite Agatha personally. You'll come, won't you, Mrs. Raisin? It would mean a great deal. The meeting's at the council office, and Flora Pym will be there, said Agatha. Yes, admitted Mrs. Bloxby gently, but perhaps a little civility might remind people of your better nature. Agatha smiled grimly. My better nature is at the hairdresser's having a rest. Still, I'll come. The council chamber smelled faintly of floor polish and moral superiority. A large urn of tea steamed in the corner beside plates of dry sandwiches. Flora Pym presided at the head of the table, crisp blouse immaculate, her manner that of a headmistress forced to host a school reunion. Mrs. Raisin, she said coolly, so good of you to join us. I'm sure we can all agree that recent media attention has been unhelpful. For some more than others, said Agatha sweetly. Lila Crown sat a few seats away, dressed in sombre elegance, her eyes still red-rimmed in a way that suggested more cosmetics than sorrow. Ted Mullins loitered near the biscuits, his workman's jacket giving him the air of an uninvited guest. We are here, Flora continued, to discuss the reopening of the Red Lion once investigations conclude. There are financial and reputational matters at stake. Agatha folded her arms. You mean profit and pride? Funny how those always find a seat at the same table. Flora's smile did not reach her eyes. If you'd prefer to offer constructive input, fine, said Agatha. I'll construct. For instance, what was Damien doing handling parish funds? I understand he had dealings with the council. A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed Flora's face. He supplied refreshments for last year's fete, nothing more. Yet there's still a shortfall in the fete account, said Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby mentioned it. Flora's tone cooled another degree. A bookkeeping oversight now corrected. How efficient, said Agatha. And how coincidental. Lila gave a brittle laugh. If we're trading accusations, I could mention that Flora spent more time at the Red Lion than anyone, always inspecting licenses. Perhaps she was inspecting Damien's charm instead. A collective gasp fluttered round the room. Flora flushed scarlet. That's a vile insinuation. Then perhaps you shouldn't look so flustered, said Agatha, enjoying herself far too much. Really, Mrs. Raisin, Mrs. Bloxby interjected softly. Let's not... But the damage was done. Flora rose abruptly, knocking over her teacup. The liquid spread across her papers in a pale stain. She dabbed at it with a handkerchief, flustered. You see? Murmured Charles beside Agatha. A counsellor can't even handle tea without drama. Agatha leaned forward. Something about the spill caught her attention. The faint smell, not of tea, but of something sharper. Almonds. What blend is that? She asked innocently. Ordinary Ceylon, said Flora, rattled. Unusual bouquet, said Agatha. Rather nutty. Flora froze. For a heartbeat, The room seemed to hold its breath. Then she gave a little gasp and collapsed backward into her chair. The teacup clattered to the floor. For one terrible moment, silence reigned. Then Mrs. Blocksby rushed forward. "She's breathing," she said quickly. "Just fainted." Lila made a sound of theatrical distress. Ted swore under his breath. Agatha, ever practical, seized Flora's cup, sniffed and set it down sharply. The scent was unmistakable now. Cyanide again, faint but present. "Someone's having a very creative week," she said grimly. Bill Wong arrived within minutes, summoned by a horrified clerk. He took in the scene with a mixture of weariness and concern. "Agatha," he said, "wherever I go, there you are." "Coincidence," she said briskly, "and before you ask, I didn't make the tea." He crouched by Flora, who was beginning to stir, pale and trembling. "We'll have the cup tested," he said quietly. "If it's cyanide again, this isn't random. Someone's cleaning up loose ends." "Or trying to frame them," said Agatha. "She's the second woman nearly poisoned in a week." Flora blinked up, dazed. "It wasn't me," she whispered. "Someone switched the cups." Bill nodded. "We'll sort it. Ambulance is on the way." As the medics lifted Flora onto a stretcher, Agatha caught a flicker of movement by the door. Lila Crown, slipping away, face unreadable. Later, over late afternoon sherry at her cottage, Agatha, Charles and Mrs. Blocksby sat piecing the day together. The cats, sensing agitation, prowled between the men, bears like small, furry detectives. "Someone must have known Flora was about to speak," said Agatha. "Poisoning her mid-meeting is bold, unless it was meant as a warning, not a murder." "The same way someone warned you," said Charles. "Bottle on the doorstep, cup at the meeting, both theatrical gestures." "Yes," said Mrs. Blocksby thoughtfully, "and whoever it is enjoys spectacle." Agatha eyed her. "You're awfully calm, considering the vicarage lighter's connection to all this." Mrs. Blocksby smiled faintly. "I have faith that innocence reveals itself in time." "Faith is lovely," said Agatha, "but evidence works faster." The phone rang then, shrill as gossip. Agatha answered. Bill's voice came through, crisp with fatigue. "Preliminary tests back. The tea was tainted, yes, but only trace amounts. Not enough to kill, just enough to make her ill. Deliberate, measured. Someone wanted drama without death." "A warning then," said Agatha. "Or a frame-up," said Bill. "And we found something else. The receipt for the cyanide used at the pub. Purchased from a gardening supplier in Evesham last month." "Under whose name?" "Flora Pym," he said. "Or rather her credit card." Agatha felt a thrill of vindication. "There you have it. She's lying." "Or she's being set up," said Bill. "We'll question her once she's stable." "Mind if I come?" "Yes." "Thought you'd say that," she muttered, hanging up. Charles topped up her glass. "I love it when you're indignant. Makes your eyes flash." "Save your charm for the murderer," she said. "It might be more effective." By evening, Carsley's calm facade had crumbled again. Lights burned late in cottages as speculation roamed from house to house. Some claimed Flora had tried to poison herself. Others insisted Agatha was the intended target. The Mercester Echo posted an online update. "Second poisoning shocks quiet village." Agatha slammed her laptop shut. "If they print one more headline with my postcode, I'll start invoicing them." "Publicity, darling," said Roy on the phone, calling from London. "You're practically a franchise now." "Go franchise yourself," she snapped and hung up. Left alone, she poured another small sherry and sat staring at the rain darkening the garden path. Beneath her irritation, a thin ribbon of unease unwound. Someone clever was moving pieces faster than she could follow. Flora's panic had been real, the poisoning theatrical. But what if the warning wasn't for Flora at all? A knock at the door made her jump. It was Charles again, collar up against the drizzle. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Thought you might not either." "You thought right." She let him in, grateful despite herself. He handed her an envelope. "Pick this up from your letterbox. No stamp, just push through." Agatha tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, torn from lined notepaper, scrawled in black ink. "You don't know when to stop. Best do so before you end up like him." No signature, no envelope markings, just the faintest trace of perfume, sharp and musky. "Night venom," said Charles softly. "Lila's scent." Agatha folded the note carefully. "Maybe, or maybe someone wants us to think so." "You're trembling," he said gently. "Don't flatter yourself," she retorted. "It's fury, not fear." But when he'd gone, and the house had settled into its usual creaks and sighs, Agatha sat at the table for a long time, staring at the letter. For the first time, the thrill of the chase felt faintly poisoned too. She looked out into the misty lane, where the Red Lion sign swung in the wind, and whispered to the empty night, "All right, whoever you are, you've had your fun. Now it's my turn." The cats, unimpressed but loyal, blinked back as if to say, "About time." The next morning, determined to get ahead of the noise, between the second poisoning, the television crew, and Agatha's picture still glaring from every shop newspaper rack, the village was humming with speculation like a disturbed beehive. Agatha, however, was past embarrassment. She woke early, filled the kettle with the grim determination of a general preparing for battle, and told the cats, "Today we're taking this circus to Cheltenham." Charles Fraith, naturally, arrived 10 minutes later, immaculately pressed and infuriatingly amused. "I thought I'd drive. You in a temper behind the wheel is a public safety concern." "You're in a good mood for someone probably sharing breakfast with a murderer," she snapped, shrugging into her coat. "Darling, you say that so often it's lost its sting." Roy Silver telephoned just as they were leaving. "Aggie, fabulous idea. Film the trip, a sort of Cotswold Confidential. Viewers would adore it." Agatha hung up without comment. The drive to Cheltenham wound through damp fields glinting under reluctant sunlight. The hedgerows steamed gently, and for once the drizzle had given way to faint, watery blue. Agatha stared out the window, thinking of the note. "You don't know when to stop." "You're quiet," said Charles. "Plotting," she replied. "Same thing." The note was too neat. Whoever sent it knows me well enough to push buttons. Perfume could be Lila's, but she'd hardly risk leaving something that obvious. Perhaps she's stupid. She's vain, not stupid. There's a difference. They passed into Cheltenham's gracious sprawl of Regency terraces, all pale stone and polished brass. Agatha felt a familiar stab of nostalgia and irritation. It was the sort of place she'd once imagined retiring to, before discovering that country life involved fewer cocktail parties and more corpses. "Her flat's in Montpellier," said Charles, parking with the sort of ease only men of inherited privilege managed. "Top floor according to the estate agent's listing. Rent overdue, no answer to calls." "Then she's either fled or hiding," said Agatha, "and given my luck, probably both." The building was a tall Victorian conversion, elegant but shabby at the edges. The paint on the doorbell panel was cracked, the brass numbers dulled by rain. Agatha pressed Lila Crown's bell and listened. No response. "Do we knock again or break in?" asked Charles cheerfully. "Neither," said Agatha. "We improvise." She produced a small envelope from her handbag. "Letter from the solicitor regarding inheritance. Works every time." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You really were terrifying in PR." "And effective." Sure enough, after the third knock, a voice called faintly, "Who is it?" "Legal correspondence for Miss Crown," Agatha said crisply. A pause, then the rattle of a chain. The door opened a cautious inch. Lila stood there in a silk dressing gown, her mascara smudged, hair limp. The transformation from glossy fiancée to frightened survivor was complete. "Oh," she said, "you." "Disappointed?" "Terrified, more like. The police already grilled me for hours. I've done nothing wrong." "Then you won't mind us coming in?" Charles followed, radiating charm. "Just to talk, Lila. No accusations. Yet." The flat was chic in the way interior magazines promised and tenants rarely achieved. Pale furniture, scatter cushions, expensive clutter. Yet something was off. A single suitcase stood open on the sofa, half-packed. Next to it, a torn pile of letters and a familiar scent. Night venom lingered in the air. Agatha spotted a photograph on the mantelpiece. Damien Vale and Lila, smiling in front of the Red Lion sign. He looked smug, she victorious. "You were leaving," said Agatha. Lila sank into a chair. "I thought about it. Can you blame me? Every reporter in the county's camped on my doorstep." "They're not here now," said Agatha. "You're hiding something else." Lila's laugh was brittle. "You think I poisoned Damien, don't you? Or Flora?" "I didn't. I hated him sometimes, yes, but I wouldn't kill him." "The night he died," said Agatha, "you were seen entering the Red Lion after closing." "Nonsense, I went back for my coat." "And for a bottle from the storeroom," Agatha added quietly. Lila's face drained of colour. You were there? Yes. I saw a woman take one, silhouette like yours, coat with fur collar. Then you didn't see my face, did you? Because it wasn't me. Agatha hesitated. Lila's eyes were wide, desperate but not deceitful. Who then? Someone wearing my coat. And who would have access to your clothes? Lila looked away. Damien sometimes lent things to staff for events, or to impress his girlfriends. Ask Flora Pym, she admired my wardrobe enough. That's ridiculous, said Charles. Flora couldn't fit in your coat. Flora fits everywhere she shouldn't, Lila muttered. Agatha studied her. The bitterness sounded real. Tell me about those letters, she said, nodding to the torn pile. Lila hesitated. Private. Old mistakes. Agatha picked up one fragment. The handwriting was Damien's, bold, slanted. The words, "If your husband ever finds out," leapt off the page. He was blackmailing you, said Agatha softly. Lila pressed her hands to her face. It wasn't like that. Years ago, before Damien, I married a man in Spain. Quick, stupid, unofficial, never filed the papers. When Damien found out, he threatened to tell the Home Office, ruin me. Said bigamy made for great headlines. He enjoyed having power. And you repaid it with poison? No. She looked up furious. I confronted him. Told him if he tried, I'd go public about his private reserve deals. He was importing illegal spirits, you know. Cheap alcohol relabeled as craft gin. That's what the coded ledger was about. Agatha felt the thrill of a puzzle slotting into place. LC, FP, TM, Lila, Flora, Ted. Suppliers, maybe investors. Exactly, but the profits weren't shared fairly. He kept most of it, then had the nerve to blackmail the rest of us. So everyone had a motive, said Charles. Yes, said Lila bitterly. But I wasn't the only one he threatened. Who else? She hesitated. The Reverend Bloxby. Damien discovered something about the fate funds, Flora's embezzlement, I think, and said he'd expose the Reverend for covering it up unless the church helped launder the cash. Agatha's breath caught. The moral heart of Carsely tangled in crime and deceit. How perfectly awful and how fascinating. You have proof? In those letters. I burned most. The rest, well, Damien kept copies. Where? At the pub, in that storeroom. Agatha and Charles exchanged a glance. We searched it, said Agatha. All we found were bottles. Then you missed something, said Lila. There's a false panel behind the shelves. Damien bragged about it, said every good landlord keeps a private stash. Agatha stood. We'll find it. You're mad, said Lila. The police will catch you. They always do, said Charles cheerfully. Eventually. By evening, the Cotswold sky had bruised purple again. They drove back in silence, the fields ghostly in the headlights. Agatha's mind raced through the implications. Blackmail, forgery, the Reverend, Flora, Lila's marriage. So many threads knotted together. You realise, said Charles, if Damien was extorting half the village, we're dealing with something bigger than local spite. There'll be records, bank transfers, and one missing file behind a shelf, said Agatha. We'll find it tonight. Tonight? Aggie, the pub's still sealed. Sealed, not guarded, he groaned. You do love criminal trespass. It's one of my hobbies, alongside gardening and humiliation. The Red Lion loomed ahead, its sign swinging lazily in the wind. The police tape fluttered but held. Agatha slipped under it, torch in hand, heart hammering. Inside, the pub smelled of stale cider and disinfectant. The silence was deep enough to make her whisper. Storeroom, she said. Far wall. Charles followed, muttering, You realise if we die, Roy will sell the film rights. They reached the shelves stacked with empty bottles. Agatha ran her fingers along the back panel, tapping lightly. One section sounded hollow. There, she said. Together they pried it open. Inside, in the dusty gap, sat a thin file tied with red string. She pulled it free, heart thudding. Letters, she whispered. Bank receipts, photographs. Good Lord. The photos were of various villagers meeting Damien. Handshakes, envelopes exchanged. And one showed Flora Pym handing over cash to a figure cropped out of frame. Another showed the Reverend, head bowed, beside a crate marked Private Reserve. Charles whistled softly. Well, that's motive enough for 3 people. And possibly 1 killer, said Agatha. But which? A noise from behind made them freeze. The door creaked open, and a flashlight beam sliced through the gloom. "Who's there?" came Bill Wong's weary voice. "Of course, I should have guessed." "Evening," said Agatha brightly. "Just performing a civic inspection." He closed his eyes briefly. "Hand over the file." "You'll lose it in evidence bureaucracy," she protested. "I'll photograph every page. Promise." Reluctantly, she passed it over. He flicked through quickly, eyebrows rising. "Well," he said, "looks like our blackmailer's been busy. This changes everything." "How so?" "Because whoever killed Damien wasn't cleaning up one secret, they were erasing them all." The next morning, Agatha sat at her breakfast table, watching rain blur the world again. Bill had taken the file for analysis. Flora remained under medical observation, and Lila, according to gossip, had vanished from Cheltenham before dawn. Charles arrived with croissants. "No sign of her?" "None, and I'd bet my mascara she didn't run because of guilt. She ran because she's scared." "Of what?" Agatha stared at the newspaper headline now on the counter. "Poison trail leads back to village." "Of whoever's next," she said quietly. The cats meowed in agreement, though it was equally possible they were asking for breakfast. Carsely was holding its breath. A polite English kind of suspense settled over the village, the hush that precedes both funerals and fate committees. The police had the file, Flora Pym was still in hospital, refusing interviews, and the Reverend Bloxby had cancelled his Thursday Bible study, citing a touch of laryngitis. Agatha, never one for piety, nevertheless suspected divine timing. She spent the morning prowling her cottage, rearranging the same pile of newspapers, checking her phone and glaring at her own reflection. The woman in the mirror looked determined and faintly ridiculous. Hair too perfect, lipstick too defiant, eyes too bright with unshed curiosity. "We're paying a visit to the vicarage," she told the cats. "Confession time, his, not mine." Charles arrived precisely when she wanted him not to. "Bill says you're to keep out of the investigation," he announced, stepping inside uninvited. "Then it's a good thing I never listen to men in uniform," she said, buttoning her coat. "Coming?" "Naturally. I wouldn't miss the sermon." The vicarage garden was immaculate as always, neat hedges glistening from the night's rain. Mrs. Bloxby met them at the door, looking pale but composed. Her hands, Agatha noticed, trembled slightly as she poured tea. "You've heard, of course," Mrs. Bloxby said softly. "Flora's stable, thank heavens." "Thank heavens indeed," said Agatha, seating herself primly. "And your husband, feeling any better?" "Resting," she replied, eyes lowering. "This business has shaken him. He's in his study." Agatha's glance slid toward the half-closed door down the hall. A murmur of low male voice drifted out, the Reverend on the telephone, measured and calm. "He doesn't sound shaken," Agatha murmured. Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "He hides it well." "Some men hide everything well," said Agatha, "especially secrets." There was a small silence. Then, with a sigh, Mrs. Bloxby set down her cup. "I suppose you might as well know. John has been helping the police verify some transactions from the Fate account. It's all rather embarrassing. He thought he was signing routine invoices. It turns out Damien Vale had used the church fund to launder payments." "So the Reverend was a pawn," said Charles. "A trusting man," said Mrs. Bloxby quietly, "and perhaps a little vain about appearing worldly. He wanted to show that faith and business could coexist. Now he's mortified." Agatha leaned back. "That's convenient." "Agatha." "Oh, come now. I've known too many respectable faces hiding murky hearts. And Damien's records were clear. He liked useful friends." Mrs. Bloxby met her eyes steadily. "My husband isn't perfect, but he is honest. He'd never hurt anyone." Agatha's tone softened. "Except himself." The vicar's voice rose suddenly from the study. Yes, of course. I'll bring it myself this afternoon." Footsteps approached. Reverend Bloxby appeared, startled to see them. He was thinner, paler, the mild dignity of his face now shadowed by exhaustion. "Mrs. Raisin," he said carefully. "I wasn't expecting a pastoral call." "Just checking the flock, Reverend." "And finding wolves?" he asked dryly. "Finding truth," she said. "You were speaking of delivering something." "Church documents. Nothing to concern you?" "Oh, concern is my hobby," she said. "Perhaps you'd better let Bill carry them. You wouldn't want anything misunderstood." His jaw tightened. "Mrs. Raisin, you've already caused enough misunderstanding. My wife deserves peace." "And Damien Vale deserved what he got," she shot back before thinking. The vicar's face blanched. That's an appalling thing to suggest. Then deny it, she said softly. He opened his mouth, shut it again, and turned away. Mrs. Bloxby's voice, strained but gentle, broke the tension. Please, all of you, this helps no one. Agatha rose, contrite. I'm sorry, truly, it's just— You can't resist a sinner, said Charles. Something like that, she muttered. Outside, the drizzle had returned, faint, polite, disapproving. They walked toward the green in silence until Charles said, You went too far. I always do. That's how one finds out what people are hiding. And what did you find out exactly? That the Reverend's lying about something, and that Mrs. Bloxby knows it but won't admit it. Could be guilt by sympathy, he suggested. No, there was fear in her eyes, not for herself, for him. You're imagining drama again. Then humour me, said Agatha. We'll see who's dramatic when I'm proven right. Back at her cottage, she found Bill waiting in his car. He looked tired, but oddly satisfied. Good timing, he said. We've been digging into those bank receipts. The Reverend's signature appears on one, the last transfer to Vale's account. He told me he thought they were invoices. That's what he says, but there's more. The same account received deposits from Flora Pym's charity fund and from a second name, Lila Crown, all within a fortnight of Damien's death. Agatha felt the prickle of excitement. So all three were involved in the same scam, and one of them panicked enough to kill him. You're welcome, she said. Without my meddling, you'd still be chasing gossip. Bill smiled faintly. True, but I'm warning you, Aggie. Stay away from the vicarage. He's under pressure, and if this leaks further, it'll break his wife's heart. That woman's heart could power the national grid, said Agatha. But fine, I'll be discreet. He gave her a sceptical look and drove off. Discreet lasted until supper. At 8:30, with the rain easing into mist, Agatha found herself slipping through the vicarage garden again. Lights glowed in the study window. Through the half-drawn curtains she saw Reverend Bloxby pacing, telephone pressed to his ear, voice low but urgent. No, it must be destroyed. Tomorrow morning, before the police arrive. Agatha's pulse quickened. Destroyed what? A twig snapped behind her. She spun round and found Mrs. Bloxby standing there, raincoat buttoned, expression calm but weary. Mrs. Raisin, she said quietly, I rather thought you'd come. Agatha flushed. I was merely taking the air. And eavesdropping, naturally. Come inside before you catch your death, or cause another headline. In the kitchen the light was soft and kind. Mrs. Bloxby made cocoa with the serene efficiency of someone long practiced at forgiving folly. You heard him, she said simply. He's planning to burn papers, old correspondence between him and Damien. John thought he could negotiate restitution quietly, spare the parish embarrassment. He realizes now it was foolish. Foolish and illegal, said Agatha. Perhaps, but he didn't kill Damien, Mrs. Raisin. He only tried to protect what's left of people's faith in him. Agatha sipped cocoa, feeling suddenly tired. I envy you, you know. You still believe people can be good. Mrs. Bloxby smiled sadly. And you still believe they can't. Between us, the truth probably sits somewhere in the middle. A faint crash sounded from the study. They both jumped. Agatha rushed to the door, but Mrs. Bloxby caught her sleeve. Wait, let me. Moments later the Reverend appeared, soot-streaked and flustered, holding a metal wastebasket. Just tidying, he said too brightly. Unwanted papers. Agatha's eyes dropped to the edge of the basket where charred scraps curled, and there, half burnt, the distinctive red string from the missing file. You destroyed evidence, she exclaimed. He looked genuinely stricken. Evidence of my stupidity, yes, not of murder. Those were duplicate letters, I swear it. I didn't want them misinterpreted. They'll be misinterpreted now, she said coldly. You've made yourself look guilty. Mrs. Bloxby laid a hand on her husband's arm. John, go upstairs, please. He hesitated, then obeyed. When he'd gone, Mrs. Bloxby turned to Agatha, eyes bright with unshed tears. You can tell Bill if you must, but remember this. Compassion is sometimes the only justice ordinary people can afford. Agatha nodded, throat tight. You always make it sound so simple. It isn't, said Mrs. Bloxby softly, but it's worth trying. The next day brought sunshine, brazen and indifferent. Bill arrived early, uniform immaculate. He listened in silence as Agatha recounted the midnight scene. I figured as much, he said finally. We found ash in the vicarage bin matching the missing file paper. But the Reverend's story checks out. Duplicates only. No new evidence destroyed. So he's off the hook. Legally, yes. Morally, that's another sermon. Then we're back to Lila or Flora, said Agatha. Flora's still unwell. But Lila, he hesitated. Interpol's confirmed her Spanish marriage was real. The bigamy she mentioned means her citizenship's invalid. She's on the run. Agatha blinked. Meaning Damien was blackmailing her, and she had every reason to silence him. Or someone killed him to stop her exposure, wrecking them all. You love making life complicated, she said. No, said Bill, smiling wearily. I just report what people do. That evening, Agatha and Charles sat outside the pub, now stripped of its police tape. The sign creaked in a faint breeze. Somewhere down the lane a blackbird sang, oblivious to human nonsense. So, said Charles, we've exonerated the clergy, condemned the counsellor, and misplaced the mistress, all in a week's work. Don't be smug, said Agatha. Someone's still out there, someone clever enough to use everyone else's sins as camouflage. You do like your drama. It's not drama, it's deduction. Whoever wrote that note knew about Lila's perfume, Flora's credit card, and the Reverend's lighter. That means they were close to all of them. Someone like you, he said teasingly. Pfui, she said, stealing one of his chips. When I kill, it'll be with style. He laughed, then regarded her quietly. You know, for someone who claims to despise people, you spend an awful lot of energy saving them. She looked away, embarrassed. Maybe I just hate being wrong. Or maybe, he said softly, you like being needed. Don't get sentimental, she said briskly. It doesn't suit your tie. But later, walking home under a sky washed clean by rain, she allowed herself a small smile. Somewhere between gossip and guilt, humanity still muddled through. And perhaps, she thought, that was reason enough to keep meddling. The cats met her at the gate, tails high, as if greeting a conquering hero. She bent to stroke them and murmured, All right, my beauties. The vicar's secret's safe, the killer's still loose, and my hair's survived the humidity. We'll call that a victory. From inside the empty pub came a faint sound, a creak, a door, a whisper of movement. Agatha straightened, heart quickening, but when she turned, the street was still. Tomorrow, she said aloud, heading for her cottage. Tomorrow, we start again. It was one of those sulky Cotswold evenings when twilight seemed reluctant to commit. The rain had thinned to a silvery mist, hanging over Carsely like indecision. Agatha Raisin stood by the Red Lion's window, staring at the ghostly shapes of puddles and her own reflection. The pub, recently unsealed by police order, had been scrubbed within an inch of its life. Bill's temporary clearance for the memorial toast covered tonight only. Brass gleamed, glasses sparkled. It looked wholesome again, respectable, though Agatha had learned long ago that appearances in Carsely were only ever rented, never owned. Charles Frayth appeared behind her, holding 2 champagne flutes and his most innocent smile. If I didn't know better, he said, I'd think you were brooding. I'm planning, said Agatha. There's a difference. A dangerous one, he murmured, handing her a glass. You really think this will work? It had better. I've invited every possible killer to drink under one roof. If that doesn't yield results, I'll host a séance next. She checked the clock. 6:30. The guests would arrive soon. Outside, the church bell tolled the half-hour, a sound both homely and faintly ominous. Bill's ready, she asked. Parked round the back, lurking like a moral conscience, said Charles. He's less than thrilled about this plan. Bill never is. That's why it usually works. The first to arrive was Mrs. Bloxby, bringing gentility like a bouquet. She kissed Agatha's cheek. I do hope this isn't unkind, my dear. Calling it a memorial toast, some might find it morbid. It's not morbid, it's strategic, said Agatha. Besides, Damien Vale was a businessman. He'd have appreciated the publicity. Mrs. Bloxby sighed, as though hoping heaven might forgive her friend's methods. Next came Lila Crown, thin, pale, and trembling. She looked less like a femme fatale, and more like a woman haunted by her own reflection. Her perfume, night venom, drifted ahead of her like a warning. Thank you for coming, said Agatha smoothly. You look revived. Revived and broke, said Lila, forcing a brittle smile. I'm only here to prove I've nothing to hide. Excellent, said Agatha. That makes one of us. Ted Mullins arrived last, his boots muddy, his manner defensive. He gave a curt nod to everyone and retreated toward the bar. Flora Pym was already there, stiff-backed and immaculate in her beige suit, clutching a leather folder like a shield. Agatha noted the placement of each guest like a chess player arranging pieces. Charles, as agreed, played genial host, circulating with plates of canapes. Mrs. Blocksby murmured soothing platitudes. The Reverend, invited late in the afternoon, stood near the fireplace, eyes raised heavenward, as if to remind himself that all earthly matters were regrettable. Agatha tapped her glass. The murmur quieted. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice calm but edged with steel. We're here to drink to Damien Vale, and perhaps to clarity. The police investigation is nearing its conclusion, and I thought it only decent to gather the community for one last toast. Lila gave a nervous laugh. How thoughtful. Yes, said Flora coldly, very public-spirited, especially since the Echo still calls you our village poisoner. Agatha ignored her. Tonight, we'll raise a glass to truth, using the remaining cider from Damien's private reserve. A small batch, very exclusive. A ripple went through the group. Mrs. Blocksby looked alarmed. Agatha. Relax, said Agatha. It's been thoroughly tested, quite safe. Charles, would you? Charles poured with ceremonial flair, filling 6 glasses from the crate stacked near the bar. The faint scent of apples and something sharper drifted up, enough to make Agatha's heart beat faster. To Carsely, she said, lifting her glass, and to the truth, which, like cider, can sometimes turn unexpectedly bitter. One by one they raised their glasses. Mrs. Blocksby drank politely. Charles took a modest sip. The Reverend followed suit. Lila hesitated, then forced a swallow. Only Flora Pym kept her glass untouched. Agatha's gaze fixed on her. Not thirsty? Flora's smile was thin. I prefer tea. Alcohol dulls the senses. Pity, said Agatha. You might need them sharp this evening. The tension thickened like fog. Lila's hand trembled slightly. The Reverend murmured something about forgiveness. Ted shifted on his stool, avoiding Agatha's eyes. Before we go further, she said, I should mention something. These bottles were dusted for fingerprints this afternoon. I thought it best to confirm whose hands had touched them since they left the cellar. Ted's head jerked up. You did what? Routine curiosity, said Agatha mildly. The police were delighted to help, and the results are fascinating. It seems someone's prints are all over the crate that poisoned Damien Vale, and all over the ones stored in my shed. Ted rose abruptly. That's nonsense. Is it? I suppose it's just coincidence that you were the last to clean the storeroom, and that you had access to the keys. You can't prove anything. Oh, I think we can, said Agatha, because whoever handled those bottles left more than fingerprints. They left motive. Ted's jaw clenched. What motive? Damien cheated you, didn't he? Promised a raise, then accused you of stealing from the till. Said he'd tell the police unless you repaid him, which you couldn't. Ted's face reddened. He was lying. Was he? You spiked one of the cider bottles, intending only to scare him, maybe just a dose in his private glass. But things went wrong, didn't they? He poured for himself, then refilled others. You don't know anything, he shouted. Agatha stepped closer. Then why did you move the remaining crates to my shed? You wanted the trail to lead to me, the interfering busybody everyone loves to blame. Ted backed away, eyes darting toward the door. Charles moved subtly to block his path. Don't be foolish, said Charles. It's raining cats and constables out there. Ted's hand twitched. For a moment, Agatha thought he might strike her. Instead, he bolted toward the exit. The door swung wide, and Bill Wong stepped out from the shadows. Evening, Ted, said Bill calmly. Fancy explaining this down at the station? Ted froze. For a moment, his shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him. Then he turned slowly back to the room. I didn't mean to kill him, he said hoarsely. I just wanted to frighten him. He'd stolen my wages, mocked me in front of customers, called me country thick, said I'd end up cleaning toilets for the rest of my life. So you cleaned him out instead, said Agatha softly. He was drinking from the wrong bottle, Ted muttered. I swear I only meant it for him. But when the police came, I panicked. Flora had that ledger. I thought it'd point to me. So I hid the cider in your shed, hoping they'd think it was your doing. Thank you. said Agatha dryly. "I've always wanted a hobby in evidence concealment." Bill stepped forward. "That's enough, Ted. Let's go." Ted allowed himself to be led out, his boots dragging on the wooden floor. The door closed behind them with a heavy finality. For a long moment, silence held. Then Lila let out a small, hysterical laugh. "Well, that's that. The village can breathe again." "If it ever stopped," murmured Charles. Mrs. Blocksby looked stricken. Poor man! Such foolish pride, and such suffering caused by greed. "Greed," said Agatha, "and humiliation, the two great motivators of English crime." "And journalism," added Charles. Agatha almost smiled. The room felt oddly smaller now, the tension draining away, leaving only weariness. The remaining guests made polite excuses and left, one by one, until only she and Charles remained. He refilled her glass and nodded toward the window, where the rain had thickened again into a steady fall. Triumphant, my dear sleuth. She watched the water slide down the glass, turning the village beyond into a blur of gold and grey. "Not exactly," she said. "He was right, you know. Damien Vale was a bully, a clever bully. People like Ted don't stand a chance." "Nor people like you when pride gets in the way," he said gently. "Pfui," said Agatha, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm nothing like him." "No," he said softly. "You're better. You use your vanity for good." She snorted, half amused, half moved. "Don't get sentimental, Charles. I'll start thinking you've developed a conscience." "Heaven forbid." They stood in companionable silence. Outside, the rain tapped steadily, cleansing the village yet again, though Agatha doubted it could ever truly wash away all the envy, gossip, and small cruelties that gave Carsely its charm. At last she sighed. "You know what the worst part is? I'll miss it. The puzzle, the chase. Solving things makes me feel necessary." "You are," said Charles quietly, "especially to yourself." She smiled then, turning from the window. "Well, I suppose every village needs its fool and its detective. Lucky for Carsely, they're the same person." He laughed, and the sound, low and warm, filled the empty pub. "Come on," she said. "Let's lock up before Bill charges me with loitering at the scene of the crime." As they stepped outside, the night air hit cool and clean. The rain glistened on the cobbles, reflecting the pub's sign, the Red Lion, in a wavering pool. Agatha paused, watching her own reflection ripple and fade. "Justice," she murmured, "messy as ever, but at least it's ours." Then she straightened her coat, pulled her umbrella close, and strode off into the drizzle, leaving the pub lights glowing behind her like a promise, or perhaps, as she privately suspected, a warning for next time. Carsely woke from scandal the way it always did, with teapots clinking, curtains twitching, and gossip decaying into myth. A week later, the Red Lion reopened, newly painted and faintly self-conscious. The brass sign gleamed beneath the timid sun, and someone, probably Lila herself, had arranged baskets of geraniums along the sill, as if to suggest nothing unpleasant had ever happened there. Agatha Raisin stood outside, eyeing the transformation with suspicion. "Too cheerful," she muttered, as if a pub could be disinfected of sin with begonias. Charles beside her grinned. "You should write slogans, Carsely, where evil meets excellent floral design." "Don't start," said Agatha, though she was secretly pleased. It was nice to have company again. Charles had been attentive all week, ferrying her to and from interviews, feeding her scones when she sulked about the press. He'd even pretended not to notice that she bought every newspaper within a 10-mile radius, just to check the reporting. Inside the Red Lion, the crowd hummed with cautious merriment. Lila, sleek once more but chastened, stood behind the bar in a simple navy dress. Her smile was subdued yet genuine, a rare miracle. A chalkboard announced, "Grand reopening, proceeds to parish fund." "Redemption via bookkeeping," murmured Agatha. "Mrs. Blocksby will be thrilled." As if conjured, Mrs. Blocksby appeared at her elbow, cheeks flushed from the walk. "Isn't it lovely?" she said. "Lila's donated her first month's profit to repair the church roof." "Probably gilt money," said Agatha, "or advertising." "Does it matter which if the roof stops leaking?" Agatha had no answer to that. At a corner table, Flora Pym was nursing a sherry with tragic dignity. She'd resigned from the parish council for personal reasons, though everyone knew the scandal had singed her reputation. Still, there was something almost noble in the way she accepted her downfall, a sort of English martyrdom conducted under good tailoring. "At least she's not blaming me anymore," said Agatha. "Not aloud," said Charles. "That's progress." The Reverend took the little stage near the fireplace, smiling at the congregation of sinners. His voice, calm and mellifluous, carried easily above the hum. "My friends, temptation takes many shapes: pride, greed, vanity, and occasionally artisanal spirits. Let us remember that grace often follows folly, provided we can laugh at ourselves along the way." A gentle ripple of laughter warmed the room. Even Agatha chuckled. The sermon was short, mercifully, and ended with a prayer for community harmony. She suspected he prayed it weekly. Later, as twilight softened the square, Agatha and Charles lingered on the pub terrace with Bill Wong. The air smelled of cut grass and distant rain. "You've made yourself quite the celebrity," Bill said, unfolding that morning's magazine from his jacket. Across the glossy page blazed the headline, "The Lioness of Carsely. Local sleuth strikes again." Below it, an unflattering photograph showed Agatha mid-blink, mouth open, appearing both ferocious and faintly bewildered. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she groaned. "They could at least have retouched it. I look like a startled meerkat." "Roy sent it in," said Charles innocently. "He thought it captured your energy." "Captured my double chin, more like. Wait till I see that little viper." Bill smiled. "Fame has its price." "Yes," said Agatha, stabbing her straw into her cider. "Apparently it's paid in humiliation." But beneath the bluster was a flicker of warmth. The villagers had stopped whispering when she passed. Children waved. Someone had even baked her a thank-you cake shaped like a magnifying glass. Agatha would never admit it aloud, but she was touched. 2 days later, Carsely's routines had entirely reasserted themselves. The drizzle returned, washing away the scent of paint and scandal alike. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, tea steaming, newspapers neatly folded. She'd just finished arguing with the toaster when Mrs. Bloxby arrived, bearing a tin of shortbread and her usual air of calm benevolence. "So," said Mrs. Bloxby, settling in, "how does it feel to be the Lioness of Carsely?" "It feels like needing a new hairdresser," said Agatha. "Half the salon keeps bowing when I come in." Mrs. Bloxby laughed softly. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Villagers are fickle. Next week they'll be talking about hedgehogs again." "If only hedgehogs paid compliments," said Agatha. She poured the tea. For a while they sat in companionable quiet, the ticking clock marking the peace that follows a storm. "You know," said Agatha finally, "I thought solving the case would make me feel satisfied. It didn't. It just made me realize how lonely it gets once everyone stops needing you." Mrs. Bloxby regarded her with kind eyes. "That's because you mistake excitement for purpose. You think noise means meaning." Agatha bristled. "Well, I'm not built for silence. Few of us are. But you've done good, Agatha. You've shown that pride can kill," she paused, smiling, "and so can craft gin." Agatha burst out laughing, nearly spilling her tea. "You wicked woman. You bring it out in me." The laughter subsided into a comfortable hush. Outside, the rain brightened into a silvery drizzle that caught the light like glass beads. Somewhere a clock chimed 5. Agatha raised her cup, eyes twinkling. "Here's to the next murder." Mrs. Bloxby shook her head, smiling. "Only you could make that sound like a toast." "It is a toast," said Agatha, "to life, chaos, and the occasional corpse. Otherwise we'd all die of boredom first." The cat stretched lazily on the windowsill as the kettle clicked off again, as if in agreement. Beyond the garden, Carsely shimmered in new sunlight, every slate roof gleaming, every puddle turned to gold. And for once, Agatha allowed herself the luxury of stillness, content, if only for an afternoon, to be exactly where she was, triumphant, notorious, and though she'd never confess it aloud, quietly happy.